Welcome back to our discussion on limits. We'll continue now looking at part 3, and this part is about laws of limits. Hopefully you looked at the first and the second part. Now let's get into the third one, which is laws of limits. So these are to be followed every time you are looking at limits. Let's look at the first one. The first law of limits, the first law, we'll call it limit of a constant. Now we say that the limit we are finding is limit of a function. Now this time around, our limit, or rather our function, is a constant. Now let's find limit of a constant. How is that done? Now if I have limit as x is approaching a number c of my function k, by this we mean k is a constant, that is to say it's a function which has no x in it. It's not defined in terms of a variable, but instead just a number. So we do have such kind of functions which we term as constants. Now what will be the limit? What will this k, which is our function, approach as x goes close to c? Now as you can see, our function k is independent of x. So regardless of what x is going to approach, it will not affect this function. So in such a case, we just get the same constant. So limit of a constant is the constant itself, regardless of whatever number we have there, be it x is approaching c from the left or from the right of the constant, we still get the constant. So you need to keep that in mind, and we'll term this as our first law, which is limit of a constant. We now move on to the second one. The second law is limit of a sum. Limit of a sum. So I'm going to combine this into two. I'll say sum or difference. So limit of a sum or difference. Now what do we mean? Here we mean that our function is simply as a result of adding other two functions or subtracting other two functions. So what will be the result? If I have limit as x is approaching c of, let's say, my function is simply the sum or difference of f of x combined with g of x, the result I'm going to get will be limit as x approaches c. So the limit of x approaching c will be distributed to both functions. So it will be the same limit as x is approaching c of my first function f of x. And now I'll put either plus or minus here, depending on how the problem is presented. And I'll write the same limit as x is approaching c of the second function g of x, like that. So this is the second law. The third law under limits. So we say the third one is, I'll say, limit of a product. So by product, we mean that the function I have is as a result of multiplying other functions. So a case I might have is limit as x is approaching c of, let's say, f of x multiplied by g of x to give me a certain function. So if this is the result I have, then I get to have limit as x is approaching c. So I'll individualize the limit for the first function f of x, and I'll multiply with limit as x is approaching c of the second function g of x, like that. And this is the product rule of limits. We move on to the fourth one. The fourth one is limit of a quotient. Limit of a quotient. Now here is where we have a function which is the result of dividing other functions. A case of, let's say, limit as x is approaching c of f of x over g of x. And this gives me limit as x approaches c of the numerator like this, which is equal over limit as x is approaching c of the denominator. Now there's a condition to this. The condition is that g of x should not be equal to 0, or else limit does not exist. So this is the fourth law, which is limit of a quotient. Let's move on to the fifth law. Fifth law is limit of a function, or rather let me say of a power. So here our function is presented as a power. So what do? So if I have limit as x is approaching c, and my f of x is simply a power, let's say n like this. So what do? I'll present this as, I'm going to write limit as x is approaching c of the function. Now limit and the function all together will simply be raised to the power of n. So this is limit of a power. And now let's move on to the last one, which is limit of nth root. So if this is what I have, of which I will write this as limit as x approaches c of our function f of x, which is like this. And if this is the case, the result we obtain is limit as x is approaching c of our function, all together with the limit, you say nth power or nth root. So this is what we have. Thank you very much, and please do revise on these laws so as you get an insight on limits. Thank you, and see you in the next discussion.